Go.
Hey, good morning, mediums. Welcome to another episode of Live here on Keystroke Medium. It's season 2, episode 58. I am Josh Hayes here with my co-host Scott Moon, and today the author of the epic fantasy series, the Riyria Revelations, Michael J Sullivan, joins the show. He's been writing and publishing since 2009, and today he joins us to talk about his writing journey. Michael, welcome to the show.
Good to meet you.
I have an audio problem right now. I'm picking up music from somewhere.
Uh-oh.
That's probably Josh's sunny personality. A lot of times I get the same thing.
I've got it under control. We're good.
It's my theme music.
Something kicked on. I thought that was your theme music. I literally heard music come on the moment you started talking. I went, wow, he's got really loud music.
Was it the Bee Gees? Because I always think Josh has probably got Bee Gees.
Staying alive. Staying alive.
Usually.
Okay, so I'm sure he said all kinds of awful things about me, but
yes, I did.
I hear it. So
all truthful.
Yeah.
I'm sure that was planned.
We just make stuff up and then we ambush people. That's what we do.
Yeah. And we ramble and go, is all that true? And you say yes, and then we move on.
It's like being in court. Answer the question, counsel.
That's right.
There you go.
Well, Michael, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to hang out with us and talk about your books. I was really excited when you agreed to come on the show. I'm a big fan of your work. You mentioned yesterday, I do not have any hard copies of your books just because they're all on audio because I'm a huge audio junkie. But they are forthcoming. For those of our audience that don't know anything about you or might not know anything about your writing, could you introduce yourself and kind of tell us a little bit about how you got your start?
Okay, well, I'm a fantasy writer mostly, but I have done science fiction, at least one book of science fiction. I started writing many, many years ago, about the age of 13. And I wrote for fun for quite a few years. And then for about 10 years, I wrote very seriously. And during that period of time, I wrote horror, fantasy, science fiction, literary fiction, just about anything you can imagine, thrillers, mysteries. But then I didn't get published. And after a little over a decade, after all my friends had grown up and gone to college and had become something, I hadn't done anything. So I got a little tired of that. And I kind of decided I had wasted my life for 10 years, got nowhere. I mean, literally no one read my stuff at all. I went into a drawer just about after I'd done reading it or writing it. Threw that away, and I went back into the work world. I got a job in advertising, started an advertising company. Then I hired my wife as a president of that. We did very well. Got kind of bored of that after about 12 years of doing the same thing over and over again. So then I sat down and I said, well, just for the fun of it, because my daughter had dyslexia, and I bought her a book called Harry Potter to get her interested in it. And,
great book.
So I sat down and read it myself, and I was like, this is the most fun I've had reading since I was a kid. This is what made me want to write in the first place. I thought, well, who cares? I'm just going to write for fun. I'm not going to publish it. I'll write for my daughter, my wife, and I'll put it out on the internet. Just stick it out there and let anyone who wants to read it. So I started writing the Riyria Revelations, and I wrote, I think, the first 3 books and put them on the internet for free. No one read it. No one knew who I was. And then my wife was reading it, and she thought they were good. So we got an agent, and that agent shopped it around, didn't go anywhere. She then stopped writing to me. I would send her the 4th book and the 5th book, and she never said a word anymore. I went, oh man, this is bad, because my stuff must be really awful. Turned out her husband had relapsed with leukemia, and she basically gave up the job, and she was no longer even doing anything. So
oh, wow.
Like, well, so on the one hand, I feel really bad for her, and on the other hand, I was like, well, it's not me, at least. So there's that.
Right.
Yeah.
So I gave up, kind of got really depressed, because I finished the series and I knew it was really good when I got done. I like fist pumped when I got done writing the series. I'm like, this is the best thing I have ever read, much less, written. I was like, this is fantastic. And then I got really depressed because I knew no one was ever going to read it. And like, my wife was really busy at the time. She was dealing with multiple jobs and stuff, and she didn't have the time to read it. And so I just got really, really depressed. And then she noticed, she said, what's wrong? I said, nothing. You're depressed. I'm like, no, it's okay. And I said, well, I just got done. It's really good, and no one's going to read it. And she said, well, let me look at it. So the obligatory wife saying, all right, I'll read this crap and then let you know that I at least went that far. And she read it. And turned out she's like, well, that's not bad. Let me see the next book. Huh. That's pretty good. Can I have the next book? And then she got to the 5th book. And I would ask her, I'd say, what did you think of that book? And she'd tell me, and I'd write down notes. And I get to the next book, and I'd write down notes. Then I got to the 5th book, and she's like, no, give me the next book. We'll talk later. And then she finished the 5th book. And she's like a workaholic. She never stays home. But she finished the 5th book. She called in sick. She said, no, I'm reading this book. And I was sleeping. First thing I did is I got up, came downstairs, and she's like, give me the book now. And so that's when I kind of knew I was doing pretty well.
It reminds me of that scene from Misery. She didn't grab a sledgehammer and a 2x4 ever, did she?
No, but yeah. So I figured I must have been doing something good. So she got done reading it, and she really liked it, obviously. So she got it. Well, she was going to self-publish it because, obviously no one was picking it up. And then what happened was, this is back before the Kindle, so we were literally having to print these books up ourselves, and we're going to like sell them out of the trunk of my car, that kind of thing. And so it wasn't going to go anywhere. But then, just as we got done printing it, we got it all set up. We noticed that we hadn't been checking our email in a while, and we had an email from 3 months ago from a Minnesota publisher that said, "Yeah, we'll pick it up." So it's like, oh.
Awkward.
Good. So all that information about self-publishing was put on ice, and we went with them, and they published the first book. But they were a very small company, and they really didn't know, much. And while they did put it together and they did edit it, the problem was they weren't good business people. And so they also had other authors, and they weren't paying their bills, and they couldn't get my second book out. So we got our rights back. And I just started self-publishing it because I had certain deadlines I needed to meet, because I had expectations of bloggers, I had expectations of book clubs, and so I had to get it out. And I literally had like 1 month from the time I found out they couldn't do it to I get it out myself. So I then self-published the next 4 books in the series. And at that point, I went from making like just a few $100, enough, go out for dinner or something, then enough to actually take a trip. And then finally, after about the 4th book, I was making about $1,000 a month. Oh, well, actually, I was selling about 1,000 units a month, and I was making about, like $30,000 a month, which is a decent income. Yeah. But then November hit, and the 5th book came out, and that's when I went from selling 1,000 units to selling 10,000 units.
Oh my goodness.
And at the same time, just before that, my wife had decided to shop around New York again. And it just turned out that while she was shopping it around, I also hit the movers and shakers list on Amazon. And that's when I started getting offers. So it all kind of popped at the same time.
So when you did your offers through the publishing company for those books, did you have to unpublish them, or did you get like a hybrid deal, a print ebook hybrid deal? How did that work?
No, they wanted us to pull them off. And what that did was there was a 3-month period where my books were not for sale. My wife did not like that very much, obviously.
Yes.
So what she did was just write a short story so we can at least have something out there. And I said, well, fine, we'll do that. So I ended up writing a short story. But see, I'm a novelist. I don't write short stories. I don't even know how. I'm terrible at it. I think I am. Other people tell me I'm not, but I would say I probably am. So I wrote. Different. I didn't know what to do. Right. I didn't know how to go about it. So what I did was I wrote the first chapter of a book. And I said it as like a little about the history of my books. It's about 2 thieves who have been together for 12 years, and they go on this adventure. Well, I just went back the 2nd year that they were together, and I just had a little short story about how they met one of the characters. And that was how I did it. I did the first chapter, and it was pretty good. But then, of course, I started thinking, I started a book. I wanted to see how it turned out.
Better finish it. Yeah.
So that ended up being prequels I ended up doing afterwards. But so that was a short story we put up there. And then that's how I got started writing the prequels, which are the Riyria Chronicles.
Go ahead, Scott.
Oh, I was going to say there's several things there, but yeah, we've talked several times about the difference between writing long and short fiction and things like that. And how if you haven't done the short stuff for a while, it seems like it should be easy, but it's not. What I was going to ask you, kind of with Josh's question, is when you did all that, when you got reacquired by traditional publishing, did they change all your book covers, editing? I mean, what were all the different stuff that happened when that went through?
Yeah. Okay. So they did edit it. They came back with structural edits, which, okay, so I had already had 70,000 people had read it and commented. I mean, I had, Amazon critiques. I had people who had emailed me messages. And so I had a huge sampling, and I knew exactly what my readers wanted and what they liked and what they didn't like. So when it went to New York and they came back with structural edits, I'm like, yeah, that one's right. No, that's wrong. That's right. No, you're completely wrong, 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 wrong. Okay. No.
How did they respond to that when you
well,
said, this is why I'm telling you you're wrong, because me and 70,000 of my friends don't agree with you?
Well, this was the interesting thing, was that there are these horror stories that authors submit their books and, then they're asked to completely rewrite them and change their vision. And this has always been an issue. And I've heard those stories too. And I actually think I've met some people who have done that, but that was not my case. I was with Orbit at Hachette, and they came back with a long list of things. And I just called my agent and said, yeah, this isn't going to happen. We have a huge problem. And they said, did you read the cover letter? And I said, yes, I read the cover letter. And it said, these, and it says these are suggestions. I said, yeah, suggestions, which means change it or else.
Right. Pay the consequences.
And she said, no, they're just suggestions, that you don't have to make any of them. I went, oh, well, in that case, yeah, I'm not going to make most of these. And she's like, fine. But the editor over there at Orbit was essentially saying that they don't buy a book unless they can print it as is, with minor cleanup. But they're not going to go through the effort of structurally changing everything. This isn't, Max Perkins back in, with Scribner back in the 20s. So right. They expect you to know what you're doing. And that when they get the book, barring, spelling and some grammatical changes, they're going to go with it. So they're not planning on changing much. And that was the case with me.
Did some of their structural feedback help you with your writing in the future? I mean, did you learn anything from their comments?
I learned things by going through the copy editing. Now, the copy editing is when they actually have people who they freelance out to, and they will, go through your Word file, and they'll have those little comments out, and they'll tell you all the different things and how to maybe I had a really good line editor at the time. I don't know who it is because they wouldn't let me know. I wish I did. But they went through and they showed me how to fix the sentences and do different things. And they did consistency, saying, oh, that these people rode to this inn, and what the heck happened to their horses? Because they were never mentioned. I'm like, oh, yeah.
Nice.
They died, I guess. Yeah, no one fed them. So I had the sentences, and I watched that. And so, because I learned how to write in a vacuum. I taught myself. I never had a class, and I never went to a seminar, never read a book, never had a degree, none of that. I literally read and wrote for 10 years. That's how I taught myself to write. So I missed all these things. It wasn't until after I had been published that someone told me, I think one of my, the agent says, this might be better if you concern yourself a bit more about showing and telling. I went, huh? What does that mean? Is this like a game in kindergarten? What's show, don't tell? And then there's and then she said, and the point of view shifts. I'm like, what the heck's a point of view? Because I didn't know any of the terms because I had never taken classes, which is really weird because sometimes I teach now and I would be saying something and I'll make up my own terms because I don't know the real ones. And people who have had classes in it will go, well, isn't that? I'm like, sure, maybe.
That sounds pretty smart.
I have no idea.
He must have been to a special class. That sounds like a really
very special class.
Learned it from the masters.
But yeah, so I didn't really, know a lot of it. So when the grammar kicked in and they were teaching me all this stuff that I didn't know, and I was like, yeah, this is cool. And it's like, this is all new stuff I could use. So yeah, so my writing got a bit more polished when I learned some of the basics. But in my vacuum, I had learned things like character and setting and structure and all that, which it's harder, I think, to teach. In fact, I'm not sure that you actually can learn it unless you teach yourself. Right. But the craft part, I was behind on. So that's the stuff I learned in the process of getting edited and working with many, many editors and them saying, no, you can't do that. I said, why not? I'm an author. I can make up words. Shakespeare did.
That's right.
I got some words.
I think as long as you compare everything to Shakespeare, you should be able to do whatever you want.
Pretty much anything you want to do.
Well, that was always the thing at the writers' groups. They'd all say, well, this was done in John Steinbeck's book. I'm like, yeah, are you John Steinbeck? No. Quiet.
Exactly.
Well, I talked a little bit about how they got published. Do you want to talk about the series a little bit? What's it about? The first one?
I thought you read them.
I have read them.
Okay.
For maybe people that have not.
Okay. Yeah.
It should be like 2 or 3 people.
As I mentioned,
The one person.
When I was reading fantasy, I didn't realize that things had kind of changed while I was gone, because I hadn't read fantasy in a long time, and things got kind of dark from the 80s on. There was something called grimdark, which I didn't know existed. So when I produced my stuff, people said things like, "Wow, that's like really refreshing." I'm like, how is it refreshing? This is what it's been like for decades. Like, no, it's changed now. There's people like Glenn Cook and this other guy, I think Martin, somebody, and they've changed things. I didn't know that. But what I wanted to do was, I always wanted to have a fantasy novel set in your typical Tolkien-like world, but to have it be more readable, because even Tolkien tends to get kind of long-winded, has these large expositionary phrases, because he's from an era, like if you go back to Dickens, everything's heavy in exposition, and then things got lighter and lighter. Then you ran to Hemingway, who decided to say, forget all that stuff. We're going to do it much simpler. So I wanted something more along the lines of a thriller, because you pick up something like Dan Brown, for God's sakes, you get sucked into the story. So anything like that was the thing I wanted to do, because fantasy never did that for me, unless it was a children's book like Harry Potter or the original of The Hobbit. These things were much simpler because they were children's books. But I wanted basically an adult concept book with the readability of, say, a thriller, but also the one thing that I've always found lacking in any fantasy book is basically humor, which I don't understand, because so far we've been on this show for 10 minutes, we've already made a dozen jokes.
Right.
People do that, so it's unrealistic for people to be so serious all the time, and it just doesn't feel right. So what I did was, I created this story because I had this idea floating in my head for years of, like, these 2 thieves are breaking into a castle. They go in to steal something, and lo and behold, they stumble over the dead body of a king. And like, ruh-roh, this is a problem. And then they realize they've been set up.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where the story begins. And then, of course, over the time of building these characters, I discovered that one was sort of an idealistic mercenary, and the other one was a very cynical thief, made that way by their upbringing. And as I wrote them, they had these backstories that were more and more elaborate. So the idea is just basically 2 thieves who are, in essence, not just thieves. And this is where people get kind of confused. They expect my stories to be more along the lines of, what was that, Ocean's 11 or something. It's always going to be a caper, when in fact they're more like James Bond. They do spying things, they do thefts, they plant evidence, they do information gathering, even assassinations they've been asked to do in the past. So these are things that they do. They're like special agents. If you remember the Wild Wild West, I mean, that's kind of what they were. They were special agents who would do all kinds of crazy stuff. And that's kind of what I wanted to do, but I want to set it in a medieval setting and have a little humor, have it be fast paced, have it be, and the other thing I wanted to do is, when I was growing up in the 70s, they had a lot of fantasy, and fantasy always had prologues. And the reason they had prologues is because it was a fantasy world. Before they can start the story, we have to explain the entire history, the names of everything, the names of the objects, the nouns that you don't understand, and you'll have to take this history course before we can start the story. Well, I used to hate that, and I always skipped the damn prologues. I still do to this day. I can't stand them. So as a result of that, I wanted to try and see if I could do something about that. So what I wanted to do is, I wanted to start with an interesting, action-packed theme, get you interested in the story, not even much setting, and then as I go along, I want to slowly get your feet wet. It's kind of like heating up that water that the frog's in so it doesn't jump out, right? So you slowly let you know what's going on, so you never get that block of expositionary text where you're just like going, yeah, skip. Okay, dialogue again. I'll read here. That's what I try and avoid doing. And I believed I could do it, and I did. And I actually see more and more people are starting to go this way now, is trying to not give you that lump explanation or even the prologues. They're just trying to work it in, and those were kind of things I was aiming for. I don't know if I go too much into what I wrote because then it would be bad and people would be spoiled.
We don't want to, because we have a spoiler tradition on this show where we generally give a spoiler and then we say, by the way, that was a spoiler.
Spoiler alert. We spoil and then we alert.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Because that's the way it is. It's in that spoil alert. So they're, that's the order they should come in.
And then, of course, the new series I have out is basically, so I wrote this series that takes place, which in time, if you're going by Earth time, it would have been around the 1200s, 1300s. So, high Middle Ages. And then, although I mixed that all up, so don't try and follow me with history. I like to move what I want. But then I wanted to tell the story that happened 3,000 years ago, which was the founding of the empire. So I went back 3,000 years. If you go back 3,000 years, comparatively, you'd be back in the Bronze Age, the time of Achilles and Homer and all those myths. So I went back to that time period because the story that I told in my original series about the history was all wrong. And I knew it when I wrote it because I had told my friend, I said, this is what happened in history. And he says, that is the sappiest, stupidest thing I've ever heard of. And I went, yes, you're right. But that's exactly the story they would have ended up telling.
Yeah, right.
So I kept that as kind of like the whitewashed version. But the real version is much uglier. And so I had to go back and tell the real version so that people would not think that this was the case. So that's what I ended up doing. So the Age of Myth and the Age of Swords and the Age, because I actually had completely different titles for those. But Del Rey, my new publisher, is like, yeah, we don't like those titles. Can you do something else that kind of ties them together? And, all right. And I kept thinking of Age of Swords, Age of Myth, Age of Legend. And I went to Age of Empires, and that would be the one it ends on. I'm like going, oh, that's a really bad title.
How inconvenient is that?
Yeah. So that's kind of how my books are. And then the last one, if you wanted to mention it, was Hollow World, which is the only science fiction book I wrote. And that's a whole different genre, a different attitude. But people have read that and they want to have me do a sequel. In fact, that's the only book I have that I know of that has actually been taught in universities. So that's kind of cool.
Oh, wow, that's neat.
Yeah. Everybody wants to be taught in universities.
Particularly when I did graduate from one. It's kind of fun.
I listened to The Age of Myth on the audiobook, and one of the scenes that stuck out to me in that book was the bear scene, kind of in the climax when now I'm drawing a blank on her name. She's stuck in the cave. Persephone. Yeah. She's stuck in a cave and the bear's going after her. And just like I've read scenes where, there's animal attacks or fighting or something like that. And there was something about that like I was driving in my car listening to it, and it just like everything else kind of vanished around me. And I was right there with the bear. And I was really impressed by that scene. I thought it was very, the emotional impact of that scene was very high.
You're not going to ask me if I've actually fought a bear, are you?
Have you fought a bear?
I asked that because I wrote some sword fighting scenes, and people would say, so are you like a fencer? And I'm like, no. and I had one with the boat. Like, are you a great sailor? I'm like, no, I don't. I make this stuff up. I am a fiction writer.
You ever been to space? You ever been in a Turkish prison?
You like gladiator movies, Jimmy?
You like gladiator?
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah. So there was a few scenes in that book that, like when the other girl with the wolf is whispering and she's clapping at the end with the magic. That was very cool too.
Yeah, that was Siri.
Siri.
Yes.
Siri. Yeah.
Siri, not Siri. Suri. Like with the fringe on top.
It's a little.
Yes.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier, maybe it was when we were doing our sound check, that you wrote all of them at once, like the first 5, you wrote all at once and then published, self-published. How often did you publish those books? Because now the mindset now is when you publish on Amazon, you want to try to hit the 30, 60, or 90-day cliffs when you're publishing, self-publishing. Did you have any inkling of that when you released the first 5 books, and how did you have a schedule on purpose for how you released them?
When we were self-publishing, what we did was we published the first book in October, and then the Minnesota publisher was going to produce the next one the following spring. And that's the schedule it started on. And like I said, we had worked really hard to make it as promoted as we could for people who were completely unknown. But they were expecting it in, I think, April 1. And so that's what we aimed for. Well, once I took over self-publishing it, we just kept on that schedule every 6 months, because they're all done. I mean, they're all drafted. We had to edit and clean them up and, get covers for them and that kind of stuff. But we kept it on a 6-month schedule, which was great. And my wife, I think, has determined that she insists, I think it's 4 months. I prefer 6. And in fact, what I discovered was that by talking to other authors, you've heard of these authors who, take a long time between books. Like some people who are supposed to have one in a year, and it turns out to be 2 years and then 3 years. Well, everyone hates them for that, but there's a benefit to it. And the benefit is, we've noticed that people who take a really long time for that next book to come out, when that book comes out, it hits the New York Times. Because the people have been waiting for it so long. It's had a chance to build up all this back, force, so that you read it, you tell your friends the next one's coming out, the next one's coming out, the next one's coming out. It doesn't, but then they keep spreading the word. So when it does come out, you get pre-orders and it blasts. And so in addition to that, if I had a longer release schedule, then what I could do is I can write other stuff and I can get ahead of it. Because all too often the problem with an author is that they get behind. They write their first book in a trilogy. They sell that 3-book series. They write that first book. By the time they get done writing that first book, they've already blown the advance. So now they got 2 years for the next 2 books in which you're not going to make any money. This is not a good way to try and make a living at writing. So what I ended up doing, to address what you were saying earlier, was I as I explained, I never intended to actually publish this first series. So I simply wrote them all, got them all done, and then it was just a matter of putting them out. So I never had that problem. But the thing I noticed, which was really great, was when I got to the end of the series, I was able to think of really cool things I could do, as long as I could go back and change some things throughout the rest of the series to make it all make sense. So I was able to do that. Well, when I got done with that, I thought to myself, that's a really smart idea. So when I did the next series, I decided to do the same thing. I decided to write all of them in advance. And I could do that because I already had a series done and they were being released. I also noticed that it makes it easier when I'm dealing with the publisher when they're all done, because there's certain things in the contract that say that depending on what happens between the author and the publisher and who agrees on what is edited and what, they have to have the approval of editing before they can, have certain things. So there's certain things in the contract that says they have a right to change the book and I have to agree to it and all that stuff. Well, I could just scratch that because I can give them all the books. They can approve it even before I sign the contract. Right. So I don't have to deal with it. So there's a lot of good benefits to doing that. It's an awful idea. I would never suggest this to any new writer out there. And the reason being is I did a lot of stupid things. It's like, don't tell anyone this. But
secret.
It's just between us.
Just between us.
I purposely wrote my original series so that the first book was the worst. Intentionally. Because I wanted my series, because I hated other books that would have the really great first book and then the next one not as good, and the next one not as good. By the time you get to the end of it, you're like, this is terrible.
Right.
I want to do the opposite. I wanted the first book to be the worst and get each one get better as you went along. Well, that's really dumb if you want to get published, because the first one's got to be good. So I don't even know how I managed that, but it worked. And the same thing was true with this latter series, is that I wanted to make it, again, grow. And you can't do that unless you know where it's going to go. And there's a huge number of benefits in it. But if you write a great first book and you write a second book and you write a third book and you spend 3 years of your life writing these books, or 4 or 5, depending on how long it takes you, and the first one is awful, it never gets published, look how much time you just wasted on something that's not going to go anywhere. So that's why you should do it. Especially if it's your first book. I mean, if it's your first time like it was mine, I mean, it was really dumb. But I did it because I didn't care if I got published. I was happy with just the process of writing. So if you're wondering if you should write for a living, number one requirement is if you could never get published and no one will ever pay you a dime for it and you'll still be happy doing it, then you're a writer.
And you should write. Yep. We've talked about that several times. I think that'd make life a lot easier for a lot of people. You're not chasing the dollar all the time. I mean, you have to be a professional if you want to do it as a living, but you also,
it's not several come to Jesus meetings about why am I writing.
there's easier ways to make money, and that probably includes working at the corner Quick Mart, because you probably make more money in the long term. Not really joking.
We did have a question from our live audience, Laura, or Fa Big Ben, however you want to call her name. She asks, and if there's spoilers and you can't, then that's fine too. She asks if there's any examples you can give us of the basically the lies of the history in the first series, and then the difference in the true events in the Age series. Can you think of any examples?
Well, I can think of plenty of examples. I'm just trying to figure out how can I say it without making it into a spoiler. Well, there was this whole concept in the original series that a guy named Navran betrayed his own people for the love of a woman, which is really sort of unbelievable. And the actual reality of that is it's going to be based more on a power struggle, ego. It's going to be a lot more involved and a lot more complex. It's not just a simple thing. Oh, I fell in love with this woman. Now I'm going to betray all my people for her. It was a lot more than that. And that would be a good example of the crux of how things were different. That how this came about was a lot more complicated. There was betrayals, there was backstabbing, there was power struggles, and all of that culminated into this myth of a love affair that changed the world. So that would probably be the best one.
It's a good example. And I think it's a pretty common theme in a lot of stories, and Helen of Troy and things like that. And it's always simplified and romanticized, I guess.
Yeah. Let's see, we're at the halfway mark, so let's go ahead and talk about our sponsor this episode, and then
do you have an overlay?
I do have an overlay.
I like overlays. They're my favorite part. Well, not my favorite part. Maybe
This
my third favorite part.
Third favorite part.
Fourth favorite part after the middle.
This episode of Live is brought to you again by War, which is the latest explorations anthology by Woodbridge Press. There you go. There's the overlay for everyone who's interested.
It's not a manly overlay.
It is not a manly overlay, but nonetheless, it is a good overlay. This anthology is a collection of science fiction stories set in a shared universe. Richard Fox, Jay Allen, C.C. Akeke, Nathan Heisted, Ralph Kern, Scott Baglasson, Robert Campbell, C. Cockle, and Scarlett Augie, and Scott and myself are all in this book. It was currently the #1 release in anthologies this week, and still doing very well, and all the other exploration anthologies are still doing very well. So congrats, Nathan, on that. If you haven't picked up a copy, go grab a copy and give it a read. At least some of the stories, they are very good. I've read them.
Leave a review. Reviews are cool.
Oh, leave a review too.
Nothing makes you cooler than leaving a review.
That's also
true. I mean, it's a little known fact that leaving a book review will add 5 years to your life.
Oh, I didn't know that.
It's true. It's a medical fact.
It's a medical fact. Nice. So I kind of want to get into the your process a little bit with the way you did the Age series. Now that you've been established, and then you wrote the trilogy before you published it, and then all the other books with this world. Do you find it difficult to keep all the facts and stories straight? I know a couple authors we've had on have a Bible or like a wiki page that they keep everything tracked, all the information tracked. How do you do that?
Well, what I've done now is I use Scrivener. I'm assuming most people know about that. Okay. And what that does is it keeps all your files in one kind of area, in one application. And what I do is I actually have a Bible in there where I create characters and settings and all that stuff, and they go in their appropriate folders. And then when I make a new book, I simply save as and then dump the manuscript and start over. But that background information, all my research and everything is still always there, so I can check up on it. Now, that said, that doesn't mean I don't forget a lot of stuff. So I've actually been known to go back and read through my stuff and take notes. In fact, I was writing a new book just recently called Winter's Daughter. Well, The Disappearance of Winter's Daughter. Very long title. Wife did not think that was a good idea. But when I was doing that one, I was in the process of building out this Bible more professionally because I kind of had it happenstance. So I was kind of cleaning it up. And in the process, I was reading through all of my books. And I noticed I got to a certain point, and even though I had outlined in my story where the story was going to go, I discovered while reading that one character had never met another character, and they were going to. But since this happened before that book, I'm like, oh crap, now what do I do? So I had to figure a way that these characters never actually met, which was a real problem. But that came, but there are mistakes. I've gone through and I've actually highlighted all the mistakes as I would do it. Oh yeah, that's wrong, that's wrong. It's interesting that not too many people have found my mistakes. There's only like, I think maybe 4 glaring errors. Most of the other ones worked, and a lot of it happened because, like I said, I wrote the whole thing and I went back and read it through and cleaned it all up, at least for the one series. Now the previous series is a little more difficult because more time has passed. But yeah, so using Scrivener is a great way because I don't lose my stuff. I can go down and check. I have my cast list. I know exactly everyone's background. I have and I keep adding to it. Every time I make a change, I got to go in and put more stuff in, and I review it from time to time. But other than that, the best way I know how to correct mistakes is when people write back to me and say, you made a mistake, which is never fun.
That's always...
I wish that I had, like George R. R. Martin, like a whole group of people who devoted themselves to making a wiki that I can go reference. Right. That would be ideal. But no, I actually don't have that. But
put that on the bucket list.
Doesn't he have like people you can call up and say, so what was this person? Did I kill this person yesterday or not? I mean, doesn't he actually have experts he calls up?
I know that there's two people specifically, that those 2 people are the ones that were involved in writing the Age of Ice. What is it? The Age of Ice and Fire. The one big book
Song
with
of Ice and Fire.
No. Is that it? The Song of Ice and Fire.
That's the series.
That's the series. But there's like a big hardback book. Scott, you've got it.
Oh yeah, I got it right. Well,
it's
I have the history of Westeros and all that.
Yeah, the history of Westeros. 2 people got together and they mapped out everything out of the books, and then basically went through, and then he wrote some of the histories and stuff. But you can. Yeah, that's nuts.
It's pretty interesting.
That's going crazy on your world building.
Yeah. Post world building. Well, and especially since I don't think he does. I think he world builds, but he's not he likes to use the terms gardener and architect, and I think he's a gardener, and then he writes in some sort of super primitive word processor that like WordStar or something.
It's called a pen.
Yeah. Which is a great segue, because my next question was, do you plot out all 3 books ahead of time, or do you just start writing and then see where it goes?
Well, since we're throwing out ridiculously random, made up terms, I was having tentpole writer.
Tentpole. Write that down.
Whatever that is, I'm gonna do that.
Or what I actually would describe it as, the most accurate way you can do it is, if you were traveling from, say, New York to LA, you're leaving from New York, and you're going to LA, and about time you need to be there. But you also want to stop off in Chicago and and Denver, and that's when you leave. You pack up the stuff you need and you set off. So in book terms, what the beginning is, what the end is, a couple scenes in the middle. But you get to Chicago and you're having a blast, and you just don't have time to go to Denver. Or you meet someone, and he invites you to someplace in Oklahoma. Well, that's where you go, because that's where the story changes. And for me, when you create a character, it's character, their action defines what kind of person they are and what motivations they have. And you can flip that equation around, and you can see that by their character and their motivation, what action they will take. And these should be, something you can recognize. And so if you have your character in a situation and they don't want to go the way you want them to go, you can't force them, because if you do, you have a contrived plot. It's like, having a mouse in a maze, and instead of coaxing him with cheese and, electric shocks, you literally reach your hand in and shove him through the no, that doesn't work. People notice it. So I start off with as many points on the map as I can. I plan out my days pretty well. Then I roll with it. When I get to a point where I feel super saturated, I'll come up with ideas, and I get a moleskin notebook and I write everything down. And then when I get a lot in there, I'll sit down at Scrivener and I'll start putting in folders, which, for those who don't know what Scrivener is, those are basically chapters. And inside the folders are individual documents, which are the scenes in the chapters. And I'll throw in a name for a chapter, because I kind of know what's going to happen there. And I might put a single sentence what's supposed to happen in that chapter. And then I will load up as many as I can. Some will just be there's going to be something here. I don't know, but something will take the space up.
Stuff here, going to Denver, leaving Chicago.
Exactly. And I'll color code the folders for different point of views. So I know kind of I'm in this point of view for this so long. When I jump to this one, I jump to this, so I can know that I'm spending an equal amount of time. When I get all that done, then I'll start thinking about that first scene. And what I literally do, and this is how I write for the most part, is I will leave my house, put earbuds in. They're not attached to anything. They're just in my ears. And I walk to a coffee shop and I talk and tell that's why the earbuds are there, so people don't think I'm insane. I talk and tell myself the story, how it opens. Because if you sit down and start writing, your creative juices start flowing and you get going. And that's why they often say, you know, just write. You know, write anything, write Mary Had a Little Lamb, and just kind of keep going, and eventually you'll get going. Well, the same thing happens when you talk. As soon as you start talking about something, your brain gets in gear, and then you can explain it to yourself. But it's a lot easier to rewrite your brain than it is if you're actually writing it down. So I will just think the story, and I'll tell myself, and I'll say, so these two fellows, they step into a bar. Like, well, what kind of bar? You hear someone else asking you, like, well, it's an old-fashioned tavern, and is it a big one or a little one? Okay, it's a little one. Where's the light source coming? Will you be quiet? I'm trying to tell you a story here. I want to know what lighting it is, okay? So you start filling things out, and then you start seeing the scene in your head. You hear the conversation, you hear the dialogue. And I'll sometimes, when I reach the coffee shop, I'll sit down and I'll try and feverishly write down all the stuff that I had told myself. And then I'll have my cup of coffee to wake myself up, and I'll walk back home, do the same thing, get home, and write down what I thought there. By the end of that, I have a pretty fleshed out first chapter for the most part. Then the next morning, I get up, boom, I can write it. That afternoon, off I am to the coffee shop again, sketching out the next chapter. But if something happens and that outline that I had changes, well, then I've got to rearrange my outline. But whenever there's a major change, it's going to affect the outline or re-outline. And when I say re-outline, I mean like I change a sentence here or there in the different chapters, or move the chapters around. That's about it.
Yeah. How many words do you typically get in a day when you sit down and actually write at the computer?
I average 2,000 words a day. Sometimes 1,500, sometimes 3,500. But yeah, I'll write for approximately 3 or 4 hours a day. I'll get up around 9 o'clock and I'll write until I'm hungry, which is usually noon or 1, depending on how well I'm. Sometimes I'll look up and go, oh my God, it's like 2 o'clock and I haven't even stopped, and my wife is going to kill me because we're supposed to stop for lunch. So that happens. Other times I'll be like, just things aren't working so good. It's 11:30. I'm like, well, let's break early because I'm not getting anywhere. But usually I'll go from anywhere from 1,500 to say 3,000 in a course of about 4 hours. And I do that just about every day.
I almost thought you were going to say you dictated when you started talking to yourself. Have you tried that at all, dictation?
Yeah, it doesn't work. At least not for me. I have to actually, work the sentence, and I actually tried one time to do. I think Brandon Sanderson did this once, where he had like a screen chapter film running, where you can see what you're doing on your screen and record it. And he did this so that people could see him actively writing and see how he goes back and changes sentences. I thought, oh, that would be cool. But as soon as I put that on, all I was thinking about was that I was recording. I couldn't think about my story. It was like completely distracting.
Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, dictation, I would just be thinking about what I'm saying, how I'm saying it. What is the command for go back? Those things would just drive me crazy. So no, I don't actually do that. It's just so much more fluid that when I'm typing, I've been doing it for so long now. It's second nature, so I don't really notice it.
Yeah. No, we've talked. We have a lot of people. That's pretty frequent. I lost my questions from the audience here. That's a pretty common question because a lot of people, they want to be productive and use the dictation methods. I like dictation, but I mostly use it to break through like writer's block. If I don't usually have that, but because it's different, and I do it more as a thinking exercise and a productivity exercise, because the editing of dictated stuff usually takes more work than it's worth. It's not really any faster because I got to go back and change all the words, and voice to text is apparently I don't speak computer or something, or I make up too many words. I don't know.
You've got some random like sentence that has 8 words that don't mean anything at all, and you're like, what did I just say?
The other day I realized that my phone recognized the word Dojian, which is a made-up word in one of my books. I'm like, yeah, I've taught my phone all kinds of horrible habits now. Anyway, so.
Well, one of the bad things was I wrote this for a series, and I have a lot of Elvish words in it and a lot of weird names. And so I never expected it to get published, and I certainly never expected it to become popular, and I never expected it to actually be put into audio.
Oh, yeah.
So
Right.
suddenly I get this call from this guy, and he says, we need to ask you, how do you pronounce these words?
Oh,
And I'm like what word? And he goes, well, on this page, and I looked it up, and he sent me a list. So how would you say this first word? I'm like, how would you say it?
Yeah.
And he came back and he says, well, I would pronounce it this way. And I would say, that's amazing. That's exactly how I pronounce it.
you're a natural. You got this down.
It's like
And
you've done this before.
I've actually sat in with Tim, who's the narrator of several of my books, and we'll get to sections like the new series. Now I know him pretty well, so we have a fairly good rapport. But he'll get to the stuff, and it's like, so what do you want me to do with this elven, dialogue that comes up here? I said, I don't care, just make up the stuff. It will sound good.
Yeah. Do something spectacular. Do something real special for that one.
Exactly.
Very Elvish.
Make it Elvish.
Which is interesting because I started the series on the Age of Myth book, so I kind of started backwards. But as I'm listening to it, I noticed that you didn't come out and say that some characters were elves, some characters were humans, some characters were dwarves. You didn't use those terms. If you did, I missed it. Is that something that you did consciously to kind of change the
How far are you in the series?
I just started the first Revelation box set. And
yeah, but did you read Age of Myth?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So when you go back 3,000 years, I felt that the chances of people being called the same thing were a little, unexpected. So I wanted to give some degree of a sense of being in a different time. Like, human beings haven't domesticated horses yet. They have a tendency to use stone or copper tools. There's a lot of things that are in the later books that are not in the first ones. And so they call different tribes different things, and they call different races different things. So in the process of doing that, what I wanted to show a lot of in the name of the first book, Age of Myth, has a lot of explanation in it. I'm trying to show the basis for how things got to be, how the wheel was invented, how metal was adopted, how the names of different races came into being, how the empire was created. All these things are condensed into the series. I've actually had a few people were a little kind of confused or not happy with the fact that I had so many inventions happen in such a short period of time, which I think I could argue the fact that, there's a war, and there's a lot of inventions usually happen during wartime.
Yeah.
Now, granted, they don't happen over this as short as period necessarily as what I have, but then again, it is fantasy, so I can get away with that stuff.
Right.
But I wanted to give an idea of how these things came about and how the world came to be, and that was one of those ways I did that. And I'm not even sure I answered your question now.
No, you did. Absolutely, okay. You did.
It seems like with inventions and things like that, change, it seems like happens more catastrophically, I guess, in societies oftentimes. I mean, you could make that point that you have the Industrial Revolution that in the grand scheme of things is actually a pretty short period of time, and that change kind of inspires more change. I don't know.
Well, I just know in wartime you have some inventions, and then they radically ratchet up in speed because there's greater need for it. And that was kind of what I had going. These are very agrarian people. They didn't have much need for change until suddenly their whole race is in possibility of annihilation. At that point, okay, yeah, we need to find out some stuff. And a lot of the stuff they don't invent. They actually borrow it from other races because they're now in contact with them. So it was more believable, I thought. But some people thought it was a little bit fast, I think.
Yeah, I could see there being a good motivation, like figure this out or die.
Yeah, so
then you should just still remind him it's fiction and fantasy. And none of this ever happened.
My favorite one is when people will call me to correct me, and they'll say things like, this is wrong. I'm like going, dude, my world.
My world. Speaking of your world, I do have a kind of a trademark question that we like to ask on Keystroke Medium, and you have lots of characters. So one thing I'm really interested in most times is, do you have a favorite secondary character that you like to write? It's not your protagonist.
Well, actually, since I have two protagonists, one of them could be secondary. And some people have thought that, which I would disagree with. But,
Right.
oh, yeah, there's a lot of really great secondary and tertiary characters. And the reality is that when I write, all of my characters are almost equally important. All of them have backstories. All of them are really cool. So I never have a problem when I have, like, this is a dull character. I mean, some of my secondary characters are better than my first one. In fact, when I was writing Age of Myth, I was creating secondary characters and tertiary characters, which were so cool. Again, they moved up and they became much more main protagonists. So if you're talking Revelations, of course, one of my favorites is Myron, who I didn't realize it until after I had written the series. And one day I was sitting down watching Wall-E, and I went, oh, that's the guy, because they're so similar in personality.
Right.
And because if you have a character that is bright and happy no matter how awful things get, and that's like Wally, it's like he keeps trying, things get bad, it's like, okay, move on. And that's basically Myron. And it makes for a very pleasant character. People like people who are generally happy, regardless of how awful things get. They never complain, and they're just upbeat. And he was always fun because he was he was a monk who had been sequestered for so long he didn't know anything. He read books, highly intelligent, knew about the history of the world, but didn't know anything practical. Like he never touched a horse before. He never met a woman before. These are things that were just completely, alien to him. So that was kind of fun. And he was a great character. And of course I had my Moriarty character and the big bad guy. So bad guys are just as much fun sometimes to write.
How do you approach bad guys or villains? I mean, how do you set about making a compelling antagonist for your stories?
Well, sadly, they're just people who are at odds with the main characters. They're not really bad. I don't think I've ever written an evil character because it doesn't make sense to me. Every hero, every villain in my story is their hero in their mind. So it's like you're playing a game of chess, right? You sit down, you make a move, well, then you switch the table around, and now you're on the other side. So when you're writing that person, you're just as gung-ho to have them win as anything else.
Right.
So they're not really evil. But what I make them, I give them generally the concept of the end justifies the means. That's something that is less noble, is viewed as less noble by our society. Or I just have him, come in conflict with the goals of the main character, which generally makes them out to be awful. And it's funny because people have read some of my characters, they go, I hate that person so much. And I'm like, they're not really bad. There's one fella who was really just trying to make the world a better place. And he was honestly trying to do a really good job. But because he was so kind of militaristic and cutthroat in how he was doing it, he was perceived as awful. But I mean, what he was doing was actually trying to make the world a better place for everybody. So he's not really a bad person, but he's just perceived that way. So, and this was not an argument. This was a sampling. I was at a con. It was con in Detroit where they went around, they asked all the various authors there, and there's a lot of authors at the Confusion, and they asked them that question, said, how do you write bad characters? And almost universally they said, well, you have to write them as real people. The days of it is evil has been completely lost. No one buys that anymore.
I always start with, I name the bad guy Josh, and then I usually put him in a blue flannel shirt, and I give him control of all the technology, and then it just kind of, we just go from there. We just go with it, try to be natural.
Secret power is the overlay.
There you go.
Ooh, I like that.
There you go.
I always say, sometimes I think writing the bad guys are funner than writing the good guys. I don't know. That's just me, though.
Sometimes they're more opinionated, maybe. I don't know.
More opinion.
Less self-editing going on with them. They just kind of tell you how it is, which is always fun with characters.
Well, Michael, now that you've been doing kind of traditional and indie and kind of a hybrid for a while now, and you've had obviously tons of success, and congratulations with that. Is there anything that you would tell your older self starting out, something that you would do differently if you could do it all over again?
Well, the one thing I probably would have told myself is it's not a waste of time. When you, like I said, when you write for 15 years and get nowhere, I would have said, don't quit. It's not a waste of time, because that is actually really hard. A lot of writers, I'm sure, who are aspiring writers will be writing and they'll wonder, is this worth anything? Is this just a waste of time? Is this worth it? Because I went from having wasted over a decade of my life to, yeah, that was all the stuff I had to do to learn. And it suddenly became really valuable. It's like, yeah, that was great. I'm glad I did that. But at the time, it was terrible. And it was just like, this is a huge mistake. Why did I do this? I ruined my life. And now it's like, yeah, that's exactly how I had to do it. And it's like, yeah, those are my college years, right? You know, I had fun, right? So that immediately switched from being a waste of time to being a huge investment that paid off. And that would be the one thing I like to be able to tell myself, that, yeah, that's not a waste of time. This is an investment. You're going to see get some reaping benefits from that. As far as publishing is concerned, no. I would actually say by sheer accident, I fell down exactly perfect. By sheer accident, I did everything right. If I had been published by a major New York publisher first, I would have made the assumption, as many do, that my agent or my publisher may be famous, and therefore I owe them a huge debt of loyalty. When in reality is, no, it was my writing that did it. Right. They might help, they might speed things up, but the reality is, no, I did it. Therefore, I don't have to, accept their views of things. I don't have to listen so much to them, because this is the weird thing, is when you talk to publishers, people assume publishers are in control. They're this authority. They will tell you, almost like in a position of them being your boss and you work for them. And the reality is, most people who work for publishers have been in the business a few years, maybe 3, 4, 5 years. Most of them are not that far out of college. You've been writing for decades. You know way more about writing than they will ever begin to know. So they cannot sit there and tell you. They can tell you what the trends are, because maybe they're monitoring them more often, and they can maybe know a little more about editing, or having seen these same problems over and over again, they can alert you to them. But when it comes to writing, you are an authority, and you know more than anybody else. Because like I said, I had been writing for like close to 20 years, and I had all this back information that I'm like going, why would I listen to you, who hasn't even written a book, much less, you don't have a first clue about it. But the thing is, any reader, any single reader can alert you to a problem in your book. They can say, look, I had a problem with this. I didn't connect with this character, or there's something weird going on here. I didn't like this part. They can tell you there's something wrong, but they often cannot tell you what it is. And they sure as heck cannot tell you how to fix it. What they usually do is they try to tell you how to fix it. And that's good. You should listen to it, because when they tell you how to fix something, what you can do is you can glean from that what the problem really is. Because oftentimes they say this is the problem, but really it's down here. And turning this will affect this. And they don't know that. But they will say, yeah, well, you try and do this, and you're listening, and they're going, oh, I now know what you think is wrong. I can fix that. It's an easy switch. Yeah, that's not a problem. And so any reader can tell you what's wrong with your book. They can't tell you how to fix it, but they can alert you to it. And publishers are nothing more than really good readers. That's it. They pay attention usually, and they will give you good, strong feedback. But they're not writers. They are not authorities, and you are. So keep that in mind, that you are the foremost authority, certainly on your writing. And absolutely. Even I would never tell another writer how to fix their book, because it's their book. I don't know what they're trying to achieve. I don't know what their vision is. I can tell them things that I've done wrong, and this looks like one of those things. But you're the authority. You have to know how to do it. And granted, if this is the first book you've ever written, I would say maybe you need a few more tries just to get used to the process, because you're not going to be expert at anything. You get on a bike for the first time, no matter how many books you've read on it, you get on a bike, you're going to fall down.
Oh, yeah.
So
if you're not willing to fall down, then you're going to have a lot slower learning process, whether it's riding a bike or something. You can't.
Yeah, you got to make mistakes.
Yeah, you got to go out there and flap around a little bit.
Go ahead. I was going to say, one of the best things you can do, I found out reality-wise, is that everyone says read good books, and they will teach you. Actually, read crappy books, read awful books, read aspiring writers. Join a writing group and read and critique awful writing, because you will find, God, I can't believe this person is doing this. This is terrible. This is the worst crap I've ever written. Oh God, I did the same thing yesterday.
I did that. Oh my God.
Yes.
And in the process of codifying what you're trying to explain to them, to try and teach them how to do better, you form it in your head in a way that you'll remember not to do it, because you'll see this is a problem, this is why you shouldn't do it, and then you'll teach yourself to avoid that same problem. I don't know how many times I have read aspiring writers' books where they will give fantastic critiques. They will read someone else's work and I want, man, they must be a great writer. The critique they gave was so insightful. And then you read their stuff and it's awful, because they don't know, they haven't learned enough to teach themselves to avoid those things. Right. And so reading really awful stuff is another good way to really learn how to write and teach people.
Do you use beta readers in your process, or do you recommend that at all? We've had several people that are kind of like back and forth. We have people that don't like them at all, and some people that really, really like them.
It depends a lot on your beta readers, I think. But yeah, I'd be curious to know what your thoughts are on that, Michael.
Apparently, you guys don't know a lot about me. You didn't research me very well. I have one of the most extensive beta systems you'd ever imagine. I don't run it. My wife does. She recruits people. I mean, you would not believe. This is like NASA sending a moon launch. She will get a lot of people requesting to be betas, and she gets them, and she puts a spreadsheet out, and she makes sure that she has readers who have read my stuff, who have not read my stuff, who have read my stuff and hate it, who have read my stuff and love it, who don't even read fantasy, who are from this country, who are not from this country, who are old, who are young. She has this huge sampling of all various types. And then she breaks them down by what books they like, how they reviewed things in the past. And she lists these all out. And then she has 2 different betas where she sends things out and has them read by chapter and give back feedback per chapter, asking things like, what did you like? What didn't you like? Where do you think the story's going? And then she has another one where they just read whatever they want and comment whenever they like. And you get the impression, and she will graph all this stuff out. She gets all the reviews from it. And she charts. Everyone has to rate like each chapter, and she can chart it. And she can look at the chapters and say, okay, this chapter got a 5, or else it got a 10, a 9, an 8, an 8, a 9, an 8, a 2. Uh-oh. Something's wrong with that chapter. And she will take all this information, compile it down, and then provide it to me. And she will edit out all the comments that are erroneous or she knows I'm not going to listen to anyway. But the good ones she'll keep in there, and then she'll send those over to me, and I'll make adjustments based off of those. But yeah, we had one in Age of Myth where I think it was like the 4th or 5th chapter. I think it was the 5th. No, it's the 10th chapter. Died. I mean, everyone's rankings went to the ground, and I knew it was going to be a problem, because you're going along with all these people, and then suddenly you go to this other race in their world, and everything is hard to imagine because I have all new names, I have all new people, it's very difficult. You're going to see the elves because you've seen that, right?
Right.
And it throws everyone, because you've already gone through 10 chapters and suddenly you're meeting these people, and it was really annoying. And I understood it, and there was a lot of exposition because I had to explain all this stuff. And so what we did was we cut it. We cut this chapter in half. We put one near like chapter 5, and then the other one was still chapter 10. And we cleaned it up, and we made it a lot simpler, and I made more of a story so it wasn't so complex. And we reviewed the scores, and they went back up, and that chapter was great again. And then we sent it to my publisher. And my publisher read through it, and they came back with one of the very few edits they made was, chapter 10, I didn't like that one so much. Could we make chapter 10 and chapter 5 1 and make it all in 10? They literally asked me to undo the one thing that we knew was a problem. And I just I'm like, how they picked that, I have no idea. That was amazing. And I'm like, no, we can't do that. And here's why. Here's why. So yeah, the beta that I do is, because I have a wonderful wife who does all this. Obviously, if you're a writer, you might not want to do that.
That's extremely intense. I mean, that's pretty impressive.
And right now she's running 2 betas at the same time for 2 different books. So we have anywhere from 30 to 50 beta readers for each book. And she coordinates all this. She has questionnaires they fill out. She reviews their emails every day. I mean, this is a ridiculous amount of beta work that she does, but it is very essential. It really does help. It doesn't change the book too much, but when it does, it can catch mistakes that neither one of us have managed to pick up on.
That's fantastic. I mean, that's an incredible resource, and I don't know how long it would take to develop that from nothing or
I
from
don't know,
scratch or from very few.
I had 5 beta readers on one of my books, and I thought that was a whole bunch of information that I could barely get through all of them. I can't imagine going through 30 to 50. Jeez. Yes.
No, that's good. You know, that's good. It shows that people really like your stories, that they're willing to put that much time into an unfinished product.
They fight over it. I mean, people get mad because they miss the announcement, and they get really upset that they didn't get in the beta. And the same thing's true with Kickstarter. When I put out a Kickstarter, because for my science fiction book, that was something I actually produced myself. And we wanted to do a hardcover it, and to get that kind of money, we had to go through the Kickstarter. But people love it when they're part of the project, when they feel that they've had an input and they've actually been part of this, like, I guess, piece of history going forward, or something they really love and they had an input. That's something they really like doing. And I can appreciate that. Maybe it would be kind of cool if you were like, you know, hey, if I worked on the original Star Wars and I suggested, yeah, you use the little, you know, the little computer thing, call it R2D2, you know, and then from that moment on, that's yours, right? So yeah, I could see that, and that would be kind of fun. But a lot of people enjoy that, and they buy into it and becomes, you know, part of them.
That's very neat.
That's
very
awesome.
neat. Well, we're over the hour, as I knew we were going to.
Time's flying by.
And it's been a fantastic interview. Michael, thanks again for coming and hanging out with us. Everybody that hung out with us in the live chat, thank you guys so much for your support and your questions. It's always a blast to watch the shenanigans that go on in the live chat.
Has there been people talking in the live chat? Because I haven't seen it.
Well, they're not in the Hangout window, but in the YouTube page, that first one that you were on, that's the live chat, and that scrolls.
Are they saying awful things?
Absolutely.
No, yeah, pretty much.
They're making bad gestures.
They're making bad gestures and causing ruckus and mayhem. And
the ruckus and mayhem, you have to understand the spiritedness, I guess, of our live chat. But I do have to say,
do you draw a large audience? Because I don't know how many people are actually paying attention. I thought it was just 3 of us. Was it more than just the 3 of us?
Yeah. Normally we get about 20 as our average.
Do you want to give a shout out to some of our people, Josh, since they've been here? We started out. We always have first on the show. Today was C. Stephen Manley, Chuck the Man, Chuck Manley. He was first to log in.
We have a very good big core of people that come and tune in every week. Vicky Malone Kennedy and Laura and Guy Anthony DeBarco, who just left. And a whole bunch of people that come and hang out with us. It's always a great time.
Yeah. Laura Moore and Corvo, AZ. There's a whole bunch. It's hard to track them all because they're so active in there that, you know, it's like a 30-page chat room. But when you were talking earlier about several of the different parts, there was a lot of very like stunned wonder about some of the things you're describing. I think
really
I can go back to where it was at. Where's that at, Joe? Anyway, but yeah, no, I think people really like the show.
Oh, good.
It was a great show.
Because I used to sell books, and I used to like go into like a Barnes and Noble or a Walden's, and I would have to stand up there and try and get people to buy the books, and literally I would like, excuse me, would you? And at the end of 2 hours, I would sell 5 books, and I would be like, gosh, I'm really sorry. And he goes, you sold 5 books. Can you come back? That was fantastic. So I have no idea what's good or bad.
Yeah, no, I think they're amazed. One, like the most recently was with the beta reading process. One of our comments was it was like staring into the Grand Canyon trying to build something. Anyway, there's a whole bunch. So next time we'll get them, we'll drag them into this discussion more, I guess.
Yes.
But yeah, good times.
Well, again, Michael, thanks for coming on. If you want to hang out for just a minute after we terminate the live broadcast, and we'll wrap it up. Like I said, everybody that's watching live, thanks for coming and hanging out with us. We'll see you next week. We've got Stephen Bailey and Darren Bullock. Is that right, Scott, or am I confusing them?
Yeah,
my mixed matching.
Yeah, no, that's the correct names. They're a writing pair. They wrote Liberators, one of the books of theirs I've read. So
yeah,
good stuff.
And then on the 28th, we have David Weber coming up, and then a Rue. And so those are.
Wait, what? David Weber's coming on the show?
David Weber will come on the 28th. Yes.
I knew that.
So come back, hang out with us. For Scott Moon, I am Josh Hayes. We have been live with Michael J Sullivan. Make sure you come back and hang out with us. We're going to talk about some reading. We're going to talk about some writing. And, of course, everything in between right here on Keystroke Medium. You guys have a great Monday.